From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here. Our featured guest today is K-State's Romulo Lollato, as he'll address a number of topics relating to winter wheat planting, which is just getting underway here in Kansas. He'll take up several questions that were raised at the series of K-State pre-plant wheat schools around the state the last 2 months on variety response to management and nitrogen applications for higher protein. And Romulo will offer a number of considerations on planting dates and seeding rates for varying growing conditions around the state, as well as why seed size is important in determining seeding rates. And further ahead, with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vander Hoeven. All that right here on Agriculture Today.
Did you eat today? Thank a farmer. A way to get more involved in agriculture is through 4-H and FFA. Through 4-H and FFA, we have been given multiple opportunities to grow as leaders and learn more about agriculture.
You can learn skills related to jobs, public speaking skills, and you get the opportunity to travel around the country and meet new people.
If you want more information about getting more involved in 4-H and FFA, visit them on their websites at kansasffa.org and kansas4h.org.
We will spend this first part of the broadcast looking at winter wheat seeding, for we're right into that season. Some planting started already in the northwest part of the state, and more acres to be sown in the coming weeks. Along with us is wheat production specialist for K-State Research and Extension, Romulo Lollato, who has just finished up quite a road excursion conducting pre-plant wheat schools for producers around Kansas the last couple of months. And you did a number of these, Romulo, so you had a lot of discussion on various things. And before we go any further, I want to bring up some of the subjects that producers were bringing to your attention at these wheat schools.
Sure, Eric. Yes, well, thanks for having me on air here today again.
You bet.
And yeah, as you mentioned, we were out in the States this last month and a half here with about 23 pre-plant meetings that I participated on. And obviously there were others that Eric DeWolf and the area agronomists did that I didn't get to participate. So we were pretty active in this last month as K-State Research and Extension on the wheat side. So to answer your question, some of the things that we focused upon on these meetings were, number one, out west, it was wheat streak mosaic because of how bad the issue was last year. We had several schools where we're focusing on trying to mitigate that, right? What are some management practices that producers can be thinking about, such as, number one, controlling volunteer wheat, making sure that the volunteer is dead 2 weeks prior to planting, but also some variety selection options that they might have, as well as working with planting dates, not being there early, trying to hold it slightly towards mid or late within the optimum planting season. That by far was the one that we were hitting the hardest across the state, was wheat streak mosaic. But across the state, other things that we were talking about were variety selection. Right, so one of the most important decisions that producers need to make, and they need to make, by now, right? Some guys may not have selected the final set of varieties yet, but definitely by now we need to be getting close to that. So variety selection is really going to dictate the yield potential on that crop, right? Different varieties, they have different yield potentials, and also they will require different management practices. So some of the varieties that, for example, have been performing really well recently, the last few years, WB Grainfield was a variety that really throughout the state has been performing pretty well. SY Monument is another variety that had a very decent performance throughout the state. As we move west, we had Joe show up. As we move in south central Kansas, we had Zenda. Monument did pretty well there as well. OSU variety Gallagher also did really well. So when selecting these varieties, some of the things that producers need to have in mind, first is yield record, right? And we as K-State, we have all that yield record that producers can check in variety performance tests in their region. So yield record would be number one. Number two, producers need to be thinking about their cropping system. Right? Are they going to plant late after a soybean, for example, which is very common north central Kansas? Well, they probably need to be thinking of some varieties that would be more adapted to those conditions. Or are they in a dryland system out in western Kansas where drought tolerance becomes number one trait and wheat streak mosaic resistance as well? So really understanding your cropping systems and looking for varieties that have strengths that complement your cropping system, right? So again, producers who are in that situation that they're going to plant late after soybeans, some questions that come very often as well, that came very often during these pre-plant meetings were, okay, what about seeding rate? What about fertility management? And they are also going to be specific to the cropping system. So in these cases where producers are going late after beans, which seems to be an increasing reality in north-central Kansas, definitely we need to be thinking about higher seeding rates. Remember that we're planting late. We have less time to tiller in the fall, so higher seeding rates. And also in furrow, phosphorus is generally money on the bank, especially because, again, we're planting late, we have less time to tiller, and that phosphorus that is readily available to the plant, it's going to increase that tillering. So really managing your seeding rate and fertility according to your cropping system.
And we want to spend some more time on seeding rates, whether you're planting late or planting at the normal time as we talk here. You say there was one more talking point that came up at these pre-plant schools on nitrogen management and with the target being enhanced protein of the crop at the end. Talk about that.
That was a very common issue this year, Eric, and also last year. And the reason for that is because as a region here in the Great Plains, we had 2 years of very low protein levels. We had very good yield conditions. With that, we allowed the grain to build on more carbohydrates, more starch in the grain, and that dilutes our protein content. So overall, Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas, we had some relatively low protein, and that originated some premiums, right? So we had producers getting as much as $1, $1.50 or more per bushel just because they were able to deliver 12% or 13% protein. So I had many questions on how to manage nitrogen to maximize both yields and protein. And to answer that question, we can look back in these last 2 years, some research that we did here at K-State together with Dorivar Ruiz-Diaz and with Ray Azevedo here on campus. And we did this research throughout the state. Really, we had 10 locations in these last 2 years, really looking at different nitrogen rates. What we learned there is that because of the high yield potentials that we had these last 2 seasons, the crop needed about, depending on location, but overall we needed about 150 pounds of N total in the season. So that means between what we applied plus what the soil had as nitrogen to maximize yields, right? So between inherent soil nitrogen and fertilizer, we needed about 150 pounds with this high yield potential that we had these last 2 seasons. For protein, we needed slightly more. We needed about 170 pounds. So that means that for us to reach our maximum protein, so for us to reach those higher protein levels, we need to be thinking of slightly more than what we're providing for the yields only, right? So that's just talking about nitrogen rate. And again, nitrogen rate is going to be tightly related to your yield goal, to your yield potential, and to the environment that you have. So if you're year after year fertilizing for a 40 bushel per acre crop, and we have a year where we pull 70, well, we're going to be nitrogen deficient then. We're going to have low protein. That's probably what we saw these last 2 years. But nitrogen management, as far as rate goes, it needs to be related to your yield goal. Whenever we think about nitrogen management based on rate, looking back at your history, see what your yield levels have been the last 3 to 5 years, and fertilize based on that. As far as timing goes, we also get a lot of that question. Should I be putting everything up front as anhydrous ammonia now, as the price is so cheap? And that's kind of a tricky question because, yes, it is cheap, but at the same time, you're putting the nitrogen out now where you might get too much growth, right? We might have too much biomass now early on. That's going to be kind of an unproductive biomass that can actually hurt us later on. We can have too much biomass now. That greater biomass is going to use more water. So if we run into a situation later on where we have a drought, probably that's going to hurt us more than anything else. Now, if we have good conditions that support all that biomass later on, I agree that it is a cheaper source, and producers could be thinking about that. Or in cases where it works really well as well, are producers who are grazing their crop, who are doing it for dual purpose. So having that upfront high rate of nitrogen now can help with having that increased forage now that is going to go and produce beef. So for producers who are looking into dual-purpose production, I think anhydrous ammonia can be a good option, or if we have a growing season where we have enough moisture later on as well. Otherwise, we might have better ways of being more efficient with our nitrogen, making sure that if our wheat, in one bushel of our wheat, we're actually taking out about 1.2 pounds of N, that we're only applied maybe 1.4 or 1.5 to produce that bushel, and not 2.4, 2.5, or even 3. So we can be more efficient if we work with our timing right and have the bulk of the nitrogen available early spring for whenever the crop really is increasing its uptake.
So which encourages then a split application that many producers employ in that instance, right?
Yes, so we just need enough nitrogen now in the fall for us to have a good tillering. Mm-hmm. So we don't want to be short now, but we also don't want too much. We want 3, 4, 5 tillers out there. So just maybe 30, 40 pounds of N just to ensure that. And then making sure that late winter, whenever we're going to start to form that head, to determine how many meshes that head's going to have, that we have nitrogen in the root zone then, so we can use it more efficiently and use it, provide it exactly when the crop is needing it the most.
And that certainly gives some opportunity for producers to think through if, in fact, they want to shoot for those higher proteins, the advantages of using a lot of that in, if not most of it, at planting time. So fodder for thought. Romulo, we've more to talk about here. If you'd stand by for a few moments, we need to take a quick break, and we'll return then as we visit more about planting time wheat management with K-State Research and Extension's Romulo Lollato, elaborating further on seeding dates and rates and the influence of seed size on those rates. We'll tackle those angles after this. Over the K-State Radio Network, you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
Agriculture Today resumes now, as across the way once more is wheat production specialist Romulo Lollato of K-State Research and Extension. We're going over several aspects of maximizing the productivity of a winter wheat crop with good management here at planting time. And what is planting time will depend, of course, Romulo, on where you are in the state as to the optimum seeding dates. And that's fairly well defined as the map would indicate it, isn't it?
Yes, Eric. So I think whenever we think about planting time, we don't want to go too early, right? And the reason we don't want to plant too early is because we're going to be increasing our risks of, for example, wheat streak mosaic out west, of barley yellow dwarf in the central part of the state, or Hessian fly, or some of the other pests and insects that might affect the crop. So we don't want to plant too early because of that. We also don't want to hold back too much because we're putting a cap in our tillering potential if we go later than our optimum date. Now, sometimes our cropping system, our rotation, it almost forces us to plant slightly later than our optimum. But then we can work with some different management adjustments to try and compensate for that. But definitely there is an optimum time, which for generally for Northwest Kansas is going to be much earlier than it will be for kind of South Central or Southeast Kansas. Probably in Northwest Kansas, we are in that window already where producers can be thinking about if they have enough moisture to be out and planting. Probably the optimum date in Colby region, as Lucas Haig always indicates, in his opinion, is about September 26th or so, and I would agree with him. But we do have case of producers planting even later than that, still working out pretty well. And, of course, as we move into central Kansas and into south central Kansas, that optimum planting date, it is delayed because of our temperature regime, right? So we're going to be warmer until later in south central Kansas, so we can plant maybe as late as mid-October or even into those last 2 weeks of October without much yield loss there. But that planting date, it definitely ties up to temperature. It definitely ties up to that fall tillering of the crop. And if we are delaying, again, we're putting kind of a limitation on how many tillers we're going to produce. That's why by planting late, we're generally better off increasing our seeding rates and also providing some phosphate fertilizer with the seed so we can be compensating for those decreased tillering potential.
Let's then bring in seeding rates and just what to shoot for there. Because of these variations in planting dates around the state, one can be flexible in that respect as well. There are certain recommended ranges for both dry land and irrigated wheat that K-State has proposed for some time, and those relatively still hold true, do they not?
Yes, Eric, so that's a good question. In the last 2 years since I've been on board, we've been doing a lot of research with the Kansas Wheat Alliance to try to see, first, is there a variety interaction with seeding rate? Should we be adjusting our seeding rate based on varieties? And two, those values that K-State developed in the past, do they still hold true, right? So we have quite a bit of data for central Kansas now. And it seems like those values that we had in the past, which we were suggesting a minimum there of about 900,000 seeds per acre, they hold true pretty well for most varieties. So in fact, we were studying 7 different varieties, and 5 of them needed at least 900,000 seeds per acre to maximize yields. If we were below 900,000, we were generally seeing a yield reduction on most varieties, if we were below about 900,000 seeds per acre. When we talk about seeding rate, it's very important for us to keep in mind that fertility levels are going to play a huge role on that. And I always like to bring that up with the examples of some producers that have a history of long-term manure in their fields in western Kansas. And for them, a very low seeding rate actually works better than a higher seeding rate. So they are working with seeding rates as low as 400, 500,000 seeds per acre. And that has been yielding more than 700, 800,000 seeds per acre. Now, that's why interaction with fertility and with planting date is very important. For our average producer, where we're talking maybe 20, 30 parts per million phosphorus there, not 90 as these producers are working with, and producers whose yield goals are maybe 50, 60 bushels per acre and not 100 bushels per acre, definitely if we are below, for the central part of the state, if we are below those 900,000 seeds per acre or so, we can be running short. On western Kansas, we generally recommend slightly lower seeding rates, so maybe a minimum there of about 750,000 or so under our standard fertility levels. And the reason we recommend less seeding rate in western Kansas as compared to central Kansas is simply because we have less precipitation, right? So we're putting less seed out there, we're going to have less biomass, so if you run into a drought later on, we are not going to get hurt as much. On the other hand, if we have very good conditions, those plants are still going to tiller out and can compensate quite a bit. So overall, we're safer with a slightly lower planting rate in western Kansas as compared to what we need in central Kansas to maximize the yields. If we're talking about irrigated crops or maybe eastern Kansas, although we don't have a lot of wheat area there, we do have the rainfall to sustain greater populations there. So maybe we can be talking about 1.2 million seeds per acre without really hurting our yields in the upper range there, just because we have enough moisture to sustain. But for the majority of the state, western Kansas, we like to see at least 750,000, central Kansas at least 900,000 seeds per acre out there.
There's a perception that if one is delayed in their planting for whatever reason, the later that planting date is pushed back, the producer should hike that seeding rate a bit. Does that still hold as well? Is that still a good guideline to follow?
Definitely. That's an excellent guideline to follow, Eric. And indeed, as we push seeding rates towards the late window, by any reason, maybe it's because of drought, we don't have moisture to plant now, or maybe it's because we haven't harvested our soybean crop yet, or whatever the reason is, as we're pushing later towards that optimum window, so the late portion of it, we should be increasing our seeding rates to compensate for that decreased tillering ability that the plant has, just because we don't have the temperature in the fall for it to tiller. So it will rely more on those primary tillers. So we need more primary tillers out there.
So you want to lean toward the upper end of those recommended seeding rates in those instances.
Exactly, yes.
There's another consideration here. You actually put together a recent article in the E-Update newsletter, which was posted this past Friday, factoring in the wheat seed size that one has on hand. Where does that figure in?
Well, I think that's a very important point that many times is overlooked here in Kansas, and I think in the Great Plains in general, with exception of a few producers, is that we still have the mentality of planting in pounds per acre. Now, producers need to be thinking that each different seed lot is going to have a different seed count. And we put some research data together that is available on the e-updates that producers can check. But really what we're looking at is that depending on how we clean that seed, we might have 13,000 seeds per pound, or we might have 17,000 seeds per pound, depending on variety as well. Some varieties that are very large seeded, for example, if we have a Westbred 4458, very large seeded variety, I have come across lots of it that had 10,000 seeds per pound, so really large seed. On the other hand, you may have Bird that has a smaller seed, or maybe the old variety from Oklahoma State, Duster, that had a very small seed as well. You might have 20,000 seeds per pound. So if you think about that and you're always planting 75 pounds per acre, you're going to be putting almost double in one variety as you would in a different variety. So I think historically we don't have the culture of checking for seed size, mostly because overall we're generally in between 14,000 to 16,000 seeds per pound for most cases, most years here in Kansas. Now, think of these last 2 years that we had, very good growing conditions. A lot of the seed that we're planting are still coming from these last 2 growing seasons. So we're likely to have larger seeds now. So if we're just keeping our seeding rates based on pounds per acre, we're going to be putting less seeds out there, and we might run short. We might actually end up with less than that 900,000 seeds per acre that we want in central Kansas, or less than that 750,000 that we want in western Kansas. So very important to double check your seed size. I know some seed companies are starting to have that on each one of those bags that they sell. They have specified their seed size. That really helps a lot. Otherwise, we have put together a very simple step-by-step way of measuring that seed size, and I encourage producers to look at our e-update, ways to looking at your seed size, and also ways to calibrate your drill based on that seed size.
As a matter of fact, that latter article also in that e-update newsletter this past Friday, the 15th of September, on calibrating your drill to improve seed distribution. There's a great deal to think about here, Romulo, for producers as they go about their wheat seeding. But when you consider that planting efficiency is essential here, given the economics of growing wheat, why all of this is worth one's time.
I definitely think so, Eric. I think, especially for our conditions here, getting a good start, getting a good stand establishment is extremely important. So make sure and check those e-update articles either on the Agronomy e-update website or on my Twitter at KSU Wheat, or Facebook, which is the same handle at KSU Wheat. Make sure and check those articles out. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out as well.
Very well. Appreciate you taking the extra time to visit with us today, Romulo, for these are matters critical to wheat producers out there as they establish this next winter wheat crop in Kansas. We'll talk again soon. Thanks.
Thank you, Eric.
He is a wheat production specialist, K-State Research and Extension, Romulo Lollato. We will return shortly with more after this break over the K-State Radio Network. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. You're tuned into the K-State Radio Network and Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and again, thanks for joining us as we check up on today's agricultural news headlines now, courtesy in part of DTN. Well, Tyson Foods has decided not to build that chicken processing plant near Tonganoxie in northeast Kansas, announcing in an open letter to the community that it will pursue other locations. The Leavenworth County Board of Commissioners voted on Monday to pull support for about $500 million in bonds to build that plant. In an open letter to Leavenworth County residents late yesterday, Tyson Group President for Poultry Doug Ramsey said the company will pull its proposal to build the plant near Tonganoxie and move on to other areas of the state or even another state altogether. As the letter reads, and quoting here, "We'd still like to get to know each other. However, after Monday's reversal of support by the Leavenworth County Commissioners, we will put our plans in your community on hold," said Ramsey in the letter. He added that, quoting again, "We still have interest in Leavenworth County, but will prioritize the other locations in Kansas and other states that have expressed support." Area residents had raised objections to the project, pointing to Tyson's environmental record and numerous other concerns about what the plant would mean to that community. Ramsey said the company was invited by state and local leaders to build the new $320 million poultry complex in Leavenworth County. The president of the Crop Science Division for Bayer, Liam Condon, said that company is making progress on the planned acquisition of Monsanto. However, he told journalists attending a global conference that the company now expects to close that deal in early 2018 rather than late 2017. Bayer filed an application on Monday to extend the European Commission's review deadline by 10 working days. He said the aim of that request was to facilitate an appropriate evaluation given the size of the transaction. Now, it's been slightly more than 1 year since Bayer announced it had signed a definitive agreement to acquire Monsanto for $66 billion. In response to a DTN question, Condon explained that Bayer has also pledged to divest overlapping business assets representing up to $1.6 billion in annual sales if necessary to answer antitrust concerns. In a separate agreement, Bayer has guaranteed Monsanto a $2 billion termination fee if the sale fails to go through, says Condon. Back in August, the EC initiated an in-depth investigation of that takeover, saying it was concerned about competition in various pesticide and seed markets. Earlier this year, Bayer indicated it would be willing to spin off its Liberty Link herbicide and seeds and traits portfolio, but Condon told DTN during an interview session with American journalists that regulators have yet to rule and that divesting Liberty Link is not yet a done deal. Condon also noted that the company has been in discussion with multiple parties about potential spin-offs. However, he noted that regulators will be taking a hard look at any sales transactions to make sure that the purchasing company is strong and can provide adequate competition in the marketplace. The U.S. Senate Agriculture Committee held a confirmation hearing yesterday for the prospective Deputy Agriculture Secretary and USDA Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs. The USDA's Rod Bain reports.
Tuesday, before the Senate Agriculture Committee, the nomination confirmation hearing for two high-level appointees for the Agriculture Department.
I look forward to working, if confirmed, with Secretary Perdue, working with this committee to see how we can utilize the department's programs to provide a better safety net for our dairy producers, among others.
We've got to lift up these exports, and that's why my intent is to find myself on an airplane seat, go out, build trust, and continue to open markets.
That's American Soybean Association CEO Steve Censky, nominated by the President to be Deputy Secretary of Agriculture, and Indiana State Agriculture Director Ted McKinney, nominated for the newly created post of Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Agricultural Affairs. Both received support during their hearing from family members and Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue. The Senate Ag Committee will hold a separate business meeting in the future to vote on the nominations. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
Now, Censky, the Deputy Secretary nominee, said he has three specific areas he would like to work on at USDA. One included diversification of both markets and crops, meaning expanding foreign trade as well as promotion of regional and local markets. It also includes diversifying crops with the help of research, extension services, and crop insurance coverage. Second, Censky said he intends to help producers adapt to changing weather and climate. And a third focus of his, rural broadband, which he says has the the potential to be transformative, as he put it. He points to advances in precision agriculture to farm more sustainably, as well as help with job creation in rural America. McKinney, who is the nominee for Undersecretary for Trade, would be the first such Undersecretary for Trade and Foreign Affairs. That position was created in the 2014 Farm Bill. He said one of the areas he'll work on is sanitary and phytosanitary issues. Countries will often cite those concerns to keep products out of their country, and McKinney deemed this to be a problem facing agricultural markets. 3 Kansas ranches are vying for a major award based on voluntary conservation efforts. Todd Domer has more on the award and how the contenders are conserving natural resources.
Sand County Foundation, in partnership with Ranchland Trust of Kansas and the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts, has named finalists for the Kansas Leopold Conservation Award. The award honors Kansas landowners for achievement in voluntary stewardship and natural resource management. The finalists are the Voorhees family, owners of Lazy VJ Farms near Fredonia, Ted and Brian Alexander, owners of Alexander Ranch at Sun City, and Beaver Creek Buffalo of Goodland. Rotational grazing and cross-fencing are used to prevent overgrazing in the Voorhees family's cow-calf operation. They also have created wetlands, buffers, and riparian areas to improve water quality, reduce soil erosion, and provide wildlife habitat. Alexander Ranch successfully has used a rotational grazing system for nearly 30 years. The Alexanders also have done extensive clearing of eastern red cedar trees and increased native plant and wildlife diversity. Beaver Creek is managed by Ken and Lori Clem while partnering with Peter and Marion Terrio on a meat marketing venture known as the Buffalo Guys. The ranch is managed using holistic practices and is a frequent site for conservation experimentation. The 2017 Leopold Award will be presented November 20th at the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts Convention in Wichita. A check for $10,000 and a crystal depicting renowned conservationist Aldo Leopold will be awarded to the overall winner. I'm Todd Domer.
And you're listening to Agriculture Today. We'll hear from K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven in a moment here on the K-State Radio Network. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen. This is our state, Kansas.
The loss of trees can lower the property value by many thousands of dollars.
That's Gus Vanderhoeven of Kansas State University, with comment on life in rural Kansas.
Last week, I briefly mentioned the one oak tree I planted as an acorn, and I told you that I had calculated the landscape value using the formula of my own publication, an extension publication, which I wrote in November 1998. I wrote it at that time to make homeowners and communities aware of the fact that landscape trees have value. The loss of trees can lower the property value by many thousands of dollars, depending on several factors. Following the steps lined out in the publication, you can calculate the value of a particular tree or trees on your home property. I established that value of my particular oak, a bur oak, that it was $7,490. I will highlight a few of the steps out of the publication. There are several methods you can use to establish the value of an ornamental landscape plant. One is replacement cost. This method is normally used for trees under 4 inches in diameter, and the following factors should be considered in replacement: removal of damaged or dead trees, digging planting holes, cost of a new tree, post-transplanting care and maintenance, and survival guarantee costs. Also, the decrease in the assessed value of the real estate. Using this method, one must ask a realtor or landscape appraiser to assess the value of the landscape with and without the tree. It may be wise to get a second opinion. A good photograph of the landscape on file can help establish the before situation. And the third is the computed method. This method of evaluating shade and ornamental trees was developed by the International Society for Arboriculture and approved by the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers. It's the most widely accepted method of shade tree evaluation and uses the following formula. Tree value is cross-sectional area times current value per square inch times species class times condition class and times location. The cross-sectional area, accurate way to determine diameter, is to measure the circumference of the trunk at breast height and divide by 3.14. The current value is the dollar value per square inch set by the Council of Trees and Landscape Appraisers. It is different at different times. At that time, $31 in 1997. Species class. Species class is expressed as a percent and is a measure of the relative value of ornamental tree species in Kansas. Relative value as based on form, color, growth habit, flowering, fruiting characteristics, structural strengths, longevity, insect and disease resistance, and general maintenance requirements. Values are listed in a table in the back of the publication. Condition class. This class is determined by examining the tree and categorizing it as excellent, good, fair, poor, or dead. Guidelines are given in the publication. Location class. Location class is determined by the plant's landscape, ornamental, or environmental modification value. The location factors extend the usefulness of the formula to evaluate plants in parks, golf courses, urban and residential areas. Each tree initially placed in one of 10 percentage classes based on its site location. By further considering the tree's location, value, its function and actual placement, the final class value may be established. Site location. The site is primary a factor in determining location class. Functional value. How well the tree serves functional uses, such as shade, screening. Tree placement. Design symmetry, crowding from other trees, interference with utilities, public safety, and potential damage to buildings. Lots of points to consider and clearly explained in the publication. There is a sample problem using the formula. I'm not going into detail, but you can read it all. My publication of November 1998 has been updated in 2015, and it is available online. K-State Research and Extension. It's called Ornamental Tree Evaluation. The point we want to make is that a landscape value has been established for trees, and that damage done or loss may be compensated. We are familiar with tornado damage and storm damage, where there has been total loss of property, as with the hurricanes and the town of Greensburg. Several years ago, it would be a moot point to make. However, it may be time well spent to read through this publication on a rainy evening. Heaven forbid that your favorite home landscape tree is damaged. but to know that you can claim damage, loss of value, is worth your time well spent.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on rural Kansas. That caps off this Wednesday edition. Peering ahead to tomorrow's broadcast, we'll welcome in K-State Farm Safety Specialist Carrie Ebert. We'll visit about the goings-on during this National Farm Safety and Health Week, which began this past weekend, runs through this Saturday. And we'll welcome back in K-State animal scientist Casey Olson for an update on the tactic of late summer pasture burning as a control approach for Serratia lespedeza. He has fresh new field data on the effectiveness of that strategy. Plus more when we return right here tomorrow. We hope you'll be back with us then. Meantime, Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.